right, what is it all chasing? Is it chasing something that you and I will actually use, or is it chasing something that back end number crunchers will use and appreciate, but is it really going to be this desperately needed thing that all these companies are willing to pay for? I just don't know.
Well, it'll be interesting if the NVIDIA chips start arriving with embedded uh, Chat GPT 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. I mean, we have the history of bundling. We also have the history of the federal government getting involved with this bundling as being too monopolistic. Is this heading towards the same sort of thing? Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Silicon Insider Podcast. Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm well, Michael. Hello.
Uh, we had some interesting news well, we're recording this early, but it just broke, but it's quite something. OpenAI has just closed its funding round, valued at $157 billion. Okay, Microsoft's in this one, NVIDIA. These are guys that can actually afford that kind of valuation. Microsoft, NVIDIA, SoftBank, Thrive Capital, and I think Khosla was in there too somewhere. This is a big valuation for a company that I'm looking at their numbers. They had $100 million last year. I mean, it's so unbalanced compared to what their revenues are. They made $300 million in revenue last month, up 1,700% since the beginning of last year. And they hope to bring in 11 billion this year, up from 3.7 billion last year. So you got a company being valued at 50 times not earnings, revenues. Uh, you got to believe that these giant corporations really believe that OpenAI is the company that's going to win the game. What do you
Right.
think?
Yeah, I think this is the hot spot right now, AI, and then the hot company in the hot spot is certainly OpenAI, and so that's why it's getting all this money. But some of it feels a little inside baseball. I mean, Microsoft is a major investor. Okay, we've known that since the beginning. Microsoft has propped this company up since it was a tiny startup. To have Nvidia in the game also feels kind of insiderish, right? After all, it's kind of you remember like Wintel back in the day where it was Windows software and Intel chips. I think
Right.
what we're seeing with OpenAI and NVIDIA is sort of that relationship. Those are the two
Sure.
dominant players in AI on the hardware and software side. And so to have NVIDIA as an investor feels like it sort of makes sense. But then I think it's also kind of artificially boosting the total money that's going into this.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, the Wintel combination of the 8080s chips and Windows, that ruled what, 90% of the marketplace? I mean, if that is true for this, 157 billion may not be enough. I mean,
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
by the way, they came away with 6.6 billion in cash to play around with to get the next generation built. What do you think? Is this a realistic projection? And there's a lot of people chasing both NVIDIA and OpenAI.
well, and that's what may make this even in the realm of realistic. I mean, 157 billion feels gigantic for something, let's face it, that's not profit proven at all yet. I mean, there's really we know there's a market for this, but we don't know if it's profitable. We don't know how big it is. We don't yet know just how much businesses, not to mention consumers, need I get it that it's the hot, sexy thing right now, but 157 billion hot, I just don't know. But all the dollars that are chasing the potential, I guess it makes sense that OpenAI is the biggest because for all of its sort of soap opera comings and goings and all that, it does seem to be where most of the heat is. And so, yeah, if you look at the potential of this, I guess the funding sort of makes sense if you squint, but I just we just don't see any sort of profitable results yet that would justify this kind of evaluation. And I realize many companies, take time, a la Amazon, to get there, but this has a big there to get to because of all the hype surrounding it.
Yeah, and as I just noted, Intel pretty well had the game wrapped up for a few years with those early, x86 chips, and Microsoft had swept, the software world. I'm not sure this is that true this time around. I mean, we have a lot of companies now trying to build at NVIDIA style chips. And OpenAI, I mean, they've had boardroom battles. Mira Murati, their chief technology, just walked after 6 years. I mean, there's some things to worry about if you're putting a lot of money into these two companies.
Yes, I think more so OpenAI than NVIDIA. NVIDIA has proven to be a super successful model that's just getting better and better.
But even they've warned they're going to be a little bit late on the next chip generation.
Maybe, but their stock went up on the day of the OpenAI announcement because they said, Jensen Huang went on CNBC saying, we just can't make these chips fast enough. And yeah. I think that's what investors want to hear, even after boosting NVIDIA to such high levels. The idea that there is such a demand because these startups like OpenAI are getting funded so much. But right, what is it all chasing? Is it chasing something that you and I will actually use? Or is it chasing something that back-end number crunchers will use and appreciate, but is it really going to be this desperately needed thing that all these companies are willing to pay for? I just don't know.
Well, it'll be interesting if the NVIDIA chips start arriving with embedded Chat GPT 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. I mean, we have the history of bundling. We also have the history of the federal government getting involved with this bundling as being too monopolistic. Is this heading towards the same sort of thing? I mean,
I don't know. I think it's too early.
If you want Chat GPT, you can't buy a Qualcomm chip. You got to buy an NVIDIA chip. I mean,
it's hard to say. I mean,
but it's happened too many times in the history of tech.
Right. But you just said yourself, there is competition. We've seen AMD in the game. We've seen Supermicro to an extent in the game. We've seen Broadcom, all the software as a service guys, like Dell and Broadcom that are just getting fat off this. So there are players that are sort of circling, what could someday be a profitable technology, but we just don't know. And I think one of the biggest wild cards is the Apple iPhone 16, which is going to be the first, I guess, and also if you have a high-end 15 already, the first to get that big Apple Intelligence, / OpenAI push. And I don't know what that's going to look like or how we're going to use it, but I am curious because I think that's going to be the first major way that we consumers get a chance to sort of mess around with this and see if it's something worthwhile.
Yeah, and Amazon just announced its Fire tablet. Is all of them, the new one, I think it's the 8th, but also the older ones, they're all going to have embedded AI on it too, on them too. So,
But for what? I mean, who cares? Are we still going to read our books on it? Yeah. Or, what else? Yeah. What is adding AI to this? It's almost like everything was .com back in the day, and to the point where that kind of got overused and undervalued and then just kind of went away.
Well, maybe you can watch it create Pride and Prejudice for you as you're reading it.
Yeah. Very good.
Sam Altman, is this the final victory of Sam Altman? I mean, he was the one that was fighting against, let's keep this a nonprofit, it's for the good of mankind. And he was the one that said, oh, no. We're going to get rich. Well, they just got rich. Is this his apotheosis as a businessman now? Did he win?
I don't think it's his peak necessarily. I think it's clearly him winning. And I think many of those executives who have left OpenAI are leaving because they didn't kill the king, right? He's still there and he's on top, and that's kind of an awkward situation. But as wealthy as Altman is, and we'll get through all this, there's talk of him getting a stake. Think about some of the people who've left OpenAI, and one of the things that came out with its round of funding was that some of the current employees who have been there for a while can start to cash in. That drooling you're hearing is from Silicon Valley home sellers that are like, whoa, you've got some OpenAI stakeholders cashing in. Ooh, that's going to let them buy whatever they want.
And that's one of the great untold stories of Silicon Valley and the rest of tech is when a company really gets the big money in, especially after the IPO, they lose an awful lot of intellectual capital in terms of talent. Someone's been working for 10 years, 8 years, in this case, 6 years, and they're sitting on suddenly a pile of money. They're thinking, well, I'll go to work, then I'll go to work tomorrow. It's not going to change me a bit. But within 6 months, most of them are gone. I mean, you watched Microsoft suddenly get stupid after their IPO because they lost so much talent up there in Redmond. And it took years for them to get them all back. And we've seen it in other companies in tech too. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with OpenAI. I mean, everyone talks a good game until all of a sudden it's that Monday morning and you got a choice between, going to work for another day or going and buying a Ferrari. I mean, it's an interesting choice, and no one really knows how they're going to react until they react.
Right. And they're still, I think, quite a ways away from an IPO. But if they're letting some of the shareholders cash in, and who knows what, I mean, gosh, $157 billion valuation is a really impressive cash in point, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I should mention the other participants, just in case you're invested in a fund or something. Coastal Ventures, Altimeter Capital, Fidelity, MGX, Tiger Global are also the other firms that are invested in this. They are breaking open very expensive bottles of champagne right now. Okay, next. This is peripheral to tech, but it's maybe central to tech, which is the ILA union just went out on strike on the East Coast, all the way down the East Coast and all the way into the Gulf, all the ports. And if you listen to the head of the union, who seems like a character out of a 1930s gangster movie, he's gonna cut our throats if you're gonna only see it on the news this week, but next week when you can't buy a car, you're going to start thinking a little bit harder about taking care of this union. And we paid our dues, and you can't argue. They went to work during COVID. I mean, they kept this economy going. Now they want payback. But if this goes on, several things happen. It influences the election because it would throw our economy into, if you didn't think we were in a recession before, this will throw us into a recession when the goods stop appearing on shelves and people start losing jobs. If the president of the United States institutes Taft-Hartley, then we get an 80-day window, which still takes us past the election while it's all still being negotiated. I mean, this is a tricky business, and you can say, yeah, these longshoremen, they pay their dues. They deserve to get some real money. On the other hand, the other requirement is in their negotiations, no artificial intelligence, no technology. We keep unloading those containers by ourselves, and then they cut to the image of Japan where some guy sitting in a room in front of a monitor lifting terminals off every 30 seconds. And that's what they're fighting against. Chips come in containers too. I mean, a lot of technology from around the world. And when you consider that you take a modern product that has components from maybe 100 countries, and we're shutting down all the ports except for the West Coast, which are going to be buried in ships. What happens to tech?
I mean, I think we saw a preview of this during the lockdown. Remember, when the supply chain concerns and there weren't enough people to unload, and then they did. You're right. They absolutely worked hard to get the economy, to keep the economy going and to keep, whether it was chips or other goods or food into the economy or cars. And I understand, as any labor, it seems, action that's taken these days is concerned about AI and concerns about machines taking over. That's absolutely legitimate as well. So
it's really hitting
things on the table. And you're right.
Scott, it's really hitting on this one. It's
Yeah, it
really
behooves all
getting
the politicians, whether the ones running for re-election or trying to get elected, to make this a short strike to get those guys back to work and to keep people working. AI is such a double-edged sword that you can say, oh, it's great for productivity, but what's good for productivity if you have people on the unemployment line? That looks bad.
right.
And you need to find jobs for these people if indeed the machines do take over. And that's a very legitimate concern. We saw it with the Hollywood walkouts and all of those things. So yeah, I think technology plays a major role here, not only in what the future workforce looks like, but right, how companies can ship chips and other things that are once again front and center in our productivity to various ports and various places.
So let's extrapolate. And we had the Hollywood strike, and we thought, well, oh shoot, we're not going to see any new movies for a while, and that kind of thing. But now we have dock workers, and these guys get ignored most of the time, but they're the heart. It's sort of like chips are at the top of the food chain for electronics. Well, containers going into ports are the heart of our economy. I don't have a problem with these guys wanting a 75% raise over the next couple of years. Fine. They deserve it. But if you refuse to allow technology to advance in this field, as with all the other ones, then we lose our productivity, we lose a lot of our competitiveness. And can we actually allow them to win on that point?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. We have had technology advances, and with almost everyone, there are concerns about job loss, very legitimate ones. But often those lead to new jobs as well. So, right, if you throw down the gauntlet and say no AI in this industry, that doesn't really make much sense. But if you say part of our contract is that we at least get to keep our jobs, well, that kind of makes sense. Why would you sign a contract to, give up your job? So I can see that fine line between productivity in the way of technology that comes in and helps, and making sure that the actual human workers are kept happy and satisfied, because it's a trade-off, but at the same time, nobody likes to say we put people out of work. That's
Right.
bad leading into an election, and that's bad anytime.
Right. No, I understand that. Does it set a precedent? I mean, one of the biggest unions in America shuts down the American economy and gets a free ride away from losing any jobs from AI. Does that just like a marker that every other union, actually every other employee group goes, oh, you can actually win that one?
Yes, that could be a marker and a precedent-setting action, and maybe an action that ultimately hurts their business. If other countries and other companies have said, and other unions even, hey, we will let you keep your jobs, but at the same time, we're going to add machines and add AI and add technology because it makes everything more productive, then right, being so anti-technology can hurt and ultimately end your company or your business or your union because you just fall so far behind. So you have to have an eye to the future, even as you're negotiating for the present.
On speaking for the union, I think it was a brilliantly timed move, because they're going to get a lot of concessions just as we get close to the election. And if that isn't enough, right after the election, when America's children realize they're not going to have Santa Claus this year,
Right.
you're going to see a lot of social and cultural pressure going on.
Right. I mean, remember, we did see this during the lockdown when the supply chain was so disrupted that everything was slow to get to us, and it took a while to catch up. And this kind of action can also slow the supply chain and the delivery of goods, and that's what our economy really depends on.
So let's see if Apple's going to get that new iPhone out in time.
Right.
That'll be a real test, because a lot of them are coming from China, and they're going to get stuck in San Pedro Harbor or something for 2 months. That's not going to look good. Okay, Tesla. I've been bringing bad news about electric vehicles and all that, and I will begin with negative news about Tesla, that it's down 5% when it announced its third quarter deliveries, because they missed expectations, but they were up. And there's a lot of deliveries are up, which suggests that maybe this kind of backlash has bottomed down, and that Tesla's starting to get more orders again, and all the bad news we saw coming, maybe finally turning around. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to say. I was trying to dig into those numbers to see, a number of things. I mean, it seems like the popular models, the three, which did get a revamp, you're starting to see a lot of those on the road. The Y is still selling well, really well. And so, yeah, the number's slightly higher than last year, just a trickle lower than what expectations were, which
At
very briefly,
435 instead of 463.
right. But that's really close. And it was a rise from last year, which you're right, considering some of the backlash, that was in some ways a surprise. Didn't look like the Cybertruck numbers were all that strong. I don't know if that's a truck thing or specifically a Cybertruck thing. We see a bunch of them around here in Silicon Valley, but I just wonder how they're doing elsewhere, especially in places where people buy a lot of trucks.
In Asheville, North Carolina, I was looking at all the flood damage and all that, and in the background, a Cybertruck went by.
You saw one.
I saw one in the middle of the flood zone. Now I know we have them here everywhere, of course, in the valley, but it's interesting. You can almost, it's like a barometer. Teslas, you don't see a couple for a while, then the next day you see 25. And I'm seeing more and more here. People are still buying them.
Yeah, it's true. Around here, a lot of people do. When I travel, I see a lot of them as well. It's the go-to brand for EVs. People are going to EVs more, but the adoption isn't really obviously fully complete. It's still it's not a niche market anymore, but it's not as big as I thought it would be right now. But the good news is we're starting to see, everyone gets all panicked. Oh, Tesla has competitors. But, aside from a Tesla investor, of which I'm not, I think it's great news that there are more EVs out there, whether in truck form or sedan form or SUV form or whatever. We just need a whole lot of them. And so the idea that with all this competition and all the Elon Musk weirdness, that Tesla actually sold more cars than they did last year at this time is kind of a surprise. And it speaks to, I think, the strength of the brand, if nothing else.
Yeah, there's almost an analogy to the early days of gas-powered automobiles. I mean, you had different alternatives like, electric cars and that sort of steam cars. And you had the Model T. And even in a world with the Stanley Steamers and, Baker Electrics and Pierce Arrows and Buick Brothers, Model T sold more than all of them combined because it became synonymous with that revolution. And I think Tesla's the same way. I mean, you see a few alternative electric vehicles on the road, but I don't see any more now, maybe a couple pickups, than I did 5 years ago. It's all the growth seems to be in Teslas. I mean, we're also not allowing Chinese cars here, but still, the electric car choice is a Tesla, and it's down to you're going to buy a 3, you're going to buy a Y.
For a lot of people, it is. You're right. Although, and I would push back on the 5 years. We have seen a lot more, but not more that are taking off like Teslas are. And if you think back to one of Tesla's biggest stock run-ups came after, I don't know, a few Super Bowls ago when a lot of the EV companies were advertising in the Super Bowl. Not Tesla. They didn't have to. But the idea in the biggest, most watched TV thing of the year, the Super Bowl, that EVs were really a thing and had caught on and were mainstream, brought investors into Tesla. Even though they weren't one of the advertisers, it was like, EV is a thing? Well, that's the company you got to get to. It's the Kleenex of tissues. It's the Xerox of, I don't know.
It's the emblem of the zeitgeist, which is electric vehicles.
Right. And Tesla, could be taking advantage of that a bit more. We could be seeing more of them as far as, more exciting models or whatever. But we do see a ton of them around here, way more than any other EV. And that speaks to, I think, again, the power of the brand, the power of something that people know and I guess feel that they can trust.
Okay, well, let's stay on Elon for a little bit longer and also Asheville, North Carolina and the floods. To his credit, the guy makes us crazy. He makes you particularly crazy because you have to cover him all the time. But he did something really nice. he said basically for all those areas that were impacted by Hurricane Helene, Starlink is available for free for the first month. Just use it. I mean, up in those hollows in North Carolina, they can't even get to them right now because the bridges are down and the roads are out. They can at least get contact to the outside world through their phones and Starlink. That's a hell of a good thing. I mean, to his credit, you got to give him kudos for that. There's a lot about Elon to piss us all off, but that's a good move. That's a good thing.
Certainly. No, the bizarre thing about Musk is it's become strange to see a post about Starlink or about a launch of a rocket or even about a, move forward in Tesla. Because when Musk posts, and he does this on purpose, deliberately, it stirs up a lot of controversy and people think he's crazy or racist or whatever. And that's the bizarre thing is he still, despite demanding all that attention for all of these despicable reasons, really wants to be known as a scientist as well, which kind of makes sense. And I don't know why he has to have both in his life, but for whatever reason, he has to have both in his life. And
He's
do know people.
Junkie. He's an adrenaline junkie. He loves this.
Yes, but at some point, and again, we haven't really seen it with the Tesla sales, but at some point, people are going to abandon whatever it is they buy about Musk because of the other stuff. And that's one of the reasons I was surprised to see a rise in Tesla sales, not because the cars aren't good and people don't love them, because they do, but because so many people are put off by him, but not enough yet to see a drop.
I can see people in Tesla dealerships putting down money and going, freaking Elon Musk, why do I have to buy this car?
Right.
Especially out here on the West Coast. Okay. One of the interesting things I've noticed over the years is if you want to find out what companies are going to suddenly get exciting, you watch certain individuals because every industry only has a handful of key people that make things happen. And I just noticed that Xbox co-founder Jay Allard just joined Amazon, and he's going to be working for former Windows and Surface chief Panos Panay from Microsoft. This is an interesting gathering of talent. I mean, these guys are not young. They're not wunderkind, but they do seem to have a lot of history behind them of successful products. And I wonder if what's going on at Amazon that's getting their attention to go over there.
Well, it's not like they have a long commute. It's all the Pacific Northwest, right? And those guys have made a lot of money.
Just cross the bridge out of Seattle. Yeah,
exactly. And, Amazon, we know it for certain things, obviously, but it's a gigantic company with huge pocketbooks. And so if they get into something new, it's worth watching. They've talked about drone delivery, and obviously they do the streaming as well. They are even into music. And we don't really think of Amazon as that. But if you're into drone delivery, you could be into some pretty exciting things even beyond that. And so I don't know what this new start for, an Allard is. But those are really well-known names, especially up there in the Pacific Northwest, especially when it comes to software and gaming and things like that. And, again, Amazon has the resources to do whatever it wants at this point.
Well, if nothing else, it's worth tracking them to see what happens.
I agree.
Okay. Are you planning on buying an iMac anytime soon?
An iMac? It's a good question.
The reason I ask is, October is always the Mac and iPod event for Apple. And rumor is that they may be putting an M4 chip in those devices. So if you're planning on buying one right now, you might want to wait like 2 weeks before you make the purchase, or you may be sobbing into your oatmeal in the morning.
All right, but I'll give you this, right? I rarely tell people to buy before an event, but after an event, weigh the previous model or two because it's going to be discounted. And if you're looking at what Apple just put out and saying, whoa, that's an expensive piece of hardware, just know that they do keep the previous models for sale. They often discount the prices. And yeah, they're a little slower, a little whatever, but they're still good machines, and you can save a few bucks.
Oh, no, I call that the Budman rule. I use it all the time. I go into stores, I see people looking at, Apple products, and I go, if you buy the previous generation, it's the Budman rule. Don't you watch them on TV?
Don't
That's
know that
what
I, yeah.
he buys the previous generation and gets a really good discount. And people go, oh, I guess that'd be true. I said,
There you go. I don't think I've quite deserved to be. Yeah. Anyway, right.
That's it. Send your thank you notes to Scott Budman, NBC Bay Area.
Sure. Sure.
Okay, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can see Scott on Facebook and X, and of course, almost every weeknight on NBC Bay Area. And you can hear me regularly on the BBC World Radio show Business Matters. Have a great weekend. We'll see you in a week. Bye-bye.